Hello and welcome to the FEZ Show. Can you believe it? It is race week already. Like, where has the time gone, basically, from the end of last season to testing? Testing was that 4 weeks ago, and here we are today, a week away from the start of season 9. It's exciting times, and with me, as always, is Edward Hunter and Mr. Pickering. How are we, boys?
Oh, I'll go first. Anyway, I hope you had a good Christmas, guys. It's great to see you again. I'm really excited to get the season underway. There's so much to look forward to, so much tension, excitement, nervousness, and all the rest of those emotions that are pretty similar, let's be honest.
Yeah, fantastic. I can't wait to see what the season's going to bring. I'd like to thank Jack for the timing of doing this recording of the FEZ show. Because my beloved Oxford United currently playing in the FA Cup, so loving that. You can timestamp this now when this was recorded. But yeah, it's going to be nice to see what happens, and I'm not going to be on site in Mexico. I don't think I'm going to be on site until probably around the European season in the end. But yeah, it's going to be weird watching it from home this weekend. But yeah, looking forward to it.
Yep, indeed, one of us now, but it's all right. The European season will be here before you know it. We got to talk testing because that's the main thing, right? We'll talk testing, what happened, give everyone a bit of a recap, and then we'll sort of talk about, what's going to happen this season, our thoughts, who's going to be on top, who's going to surprise us in good ways or bad ways, maybe, and go from there. But I want to start with this man, Maximilian Gunther. Now, this man, we all thought was out of Formula E, right? For a while. There was a lot of, I remember being in London with you, Pico, and we were looking at Gunther, and his dad was there, probably negotiating, trying to find some way to get his son or something back into the sport because he looked like he was out. And now he's back, and he was fastest of 5 of 7 test sessions during Valencia, and they set the fastest time of a 1 minute 25.127. And I want to bring this question because obviously he moved to Nissan, which was a big move from him from Penske to Nissan, Pico. And did that car just show, Buemi was struggling in it, and we know how good Buemi has been in this championship. So to see Gunther struggle and then come out and do what he's done in testing so far shows that there is clearly a good driver. It's just maybe there was something quite seriously wrong with that Nissan.
Yeah, I think we knew midway through last year that Nissan weren't going to develop their powertrain for Gen 2 any further. They were putting all their eggs in their basket for Gen 3, which is looking like it's paying off through McLaren more than through Nissan themselves. Nissan, I have looked quick. Nato's been, he was constantly putting times into the top 5, but I think he fell just around to the level of top 10 in the end.
Yeah, he was 7th in the end and top times, but still 3 tenths off, not like a massive mile away.
Yeah, and so I think, and yeah, we all thought that Gunter was going to be out the seat for the season, but I think his cards have fallen fantastically. He was very lucky that Alex Albon got was it tonsillitis he had in Monza, which put Nick De Vries into the seat, and then Nick had that fantastic weekend, and within a month of that, Nick was signed up to go to AlphaTauri for next season because Nick, what we believe is Nick was set to be in that Maserati squad for this season, but yeah, obviously that happened, and then they had between Gunther and Turvey, and they chose Gunther because I'm assuming through his former race winning experience and stuff. So yeah, I think that his cards have fallen fantastically for him, but he was very kind of like cautious about what was happening in Valencia. He was topping it. It was basically him from Stoff, literally almost every session during that week. Even in the practice race where he started, I think it was 5th or something, he made his way up to 2nd, but he's still being very cautious. Like, it's just testing, and I think he knows that because I remember, I think it was his first, I think it was his first year in BMW. He was flying in testing that year as well, but throughout the season, yes, he won that race in Santiago, but he finished in and around. I think it was like lower end of top tens, and honestly, that's a joy formula. You cannot tell anything what's going to happen, but the DS powertrain's clearly fantastic because both Maserati and Penske have that DS powertrain, and it's working wonders at the moment because they were the two quickest teams out in Valencia.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that, Ed, because okay, Maserati was Venturi, right? Venturi were quick last season, right? Here we are again, Venturi at top, right? DS, okay, that was Tech Cheetah. They're no longer Tech Cheetah. He's gone to Dragon, and okay, DS are quick. So it just shows how powerful that DS powertrain is to take a Dragon team, which was, sometimes good, sometimes bad, whereas now it looks like you've taken the DS powertrain, and all of a sudden the Dragon team or the former Dragon team, the Penske team now, are really good. But so is it looking like status quo? Because Venturi, arguably the second best team last season, DS best team. Well, not the best team. Obviously, Mercedes were the best team, but then Mercedes are McLaren, and McLaren effectively look extremely strong. So it looks like the same three teams that kind of were fairly strong last season are the same teams again that could be strong this season under different guises, in a sense.
Well, it's interesting because Maserati effectively are, I assume, planning to do their own powertrain at some point, but through the Stellantis group, they have those links to DS, so that's why they're running the DS powertrain. And of course, we know MSG Monaco Sports Group, so that's why they're called Maserati MSG to have. So they're not called Venturi, but they've still got that sort of allusion to their origins, essentially, in the team name. I think it's sort of a case of Venturi, MSG, Maserati. They sort of have this tendency to always go for the right customer powertrain. I think D'Ambrosio was talking about that before he left the team principal role, and we did an interview with him last year where he was talking about how it was really key for them to get that deal in place so they knew they'd be competitive this season. And I think with in terms of DS Penske, it's a case of it's not really the Dragon. It is the Dragon team essentially, but a lot of the staff have essentially been replaced by the DS staff essentially. So I sort of see it as kind of a new team, and I'm not surprised what Pico was saying in the testing diary that, they look really competitive, and he was, I think, making a little bit of fun of you, Jack, because you predicted that they wouldn't have a smooth sailing, and now it looks like DS powertrain has got loads and loads of miles under its belt. But anyway, we'll forget that, pretend I never said that. And as for the final thing you said about Mercedes becoming McLaren, I think they've kept all the personnel there. So it's no wonder they've gotten so much out of that Nissan powertrain. And even Rene Rast been saying it's no surprise they won the last two championships because it's a top quality team. So I think that really covers it. It's not surprising they're the three top teams seemingly at the moment, but I think there's a couple of breakaway ones, like potentially the likes of Andretti, for example, who I think had a pretty solid test. I think they could pull a few surprises. So I don't think it's all said and done just yet.
Oh no, and that's obviously the beauty of testing. But people say, and Pico's one of them, and so does everyone. It's only testing, but I still think it gives us some form of picture. I really do. But Pico, you can probably add to that in a second. But I want to talk about Stoffel Vandoorne and Jean-Eric Vergne in that DS, because if that car is going to be quick, what a driver pairing we've got, and what a title fight between those two, and a season that we could have between Vergne and Vandoorne. Like, do you see it going to the wire between them two? I think that's the easiest kind of prediction, that they're going to take points off each other and it's going to be incredibly tight. Or do you see one driver maybe blowing out the other driver?
No, I think this is. I think your guess is as good as mine. Really, I genuinely think that the entire package is just phenomenal for DS Penske this year. The fact that the DS powertrain, we knew that the DS powertrain was going to be really good, and then on top of that, you've got the most consistent driver from last year. How consistent Stoffel was last year, and the only person to win the championship twice in Jean-Eric Vergne. That is an incredible lineup, and arguably one of the strongest in Formula E history. So it's going to be very hard, I think, for anyone else to try and to try and beat them this year. And I wouldn't be surprised if we have like a Rosberg Hamilton thing between those two, where it's between them and that goes to the last race. It's not going to be as dominant as that. You will still get your Edo Mortaras, your Mitch Evans. Is fingers crossed a resurgence for Sam Bird. McLaren's there. Nissan has shown potential. It's traditional Formula E. I mean, like, they're all still so bunched together. I reckon Neo's going to be a bit further up the field. I did actually have a chat with Sergio in Valencia, and he reckons that the car's made a bit of a leap this year. But the thing is, like, everyone's starting from zero. They literally know nothing this season, so it's gonna be really, really interesting to see what happens.
I'm going to say it again, Ed, and I think I say it at the beginning of every season when we have a new... It could be the best Formula E season ever, because you don't know who's going to win, and I'm sitting here thinking now, right, all right, we've named 3 teams, right, but 3 teams is 6 cars, right, so you're going there thinking straight away, out of those 3 teams of McLaren, Maserati and DS Penske, out of those 3 teams, you're not quite sure who's going to win. I mean, there could be some surprises as well. So we say it every season, Ed, like, it could be an absolutely amazing season.
I feel like we're tempting fate every time we say that, though. But one of these days we'll hit a ceiling somewhere. But yeah, it certainly feels like there's always something new and exciting to look forward to. And I've always been impressed by the show that Formula E continues to put on and has put on through the Gen 2 era. I think there's so much about these Gen 3 cars that I really love, in terms of especially the footage we've seen of that testing, watching them, even though the drivers have complained about the tyres being too hard a compound and it affecting lap times, they look so tricky to control and get the power sort of nailed down. And I think it's going to lead to qualifying, and the race are going to be absolutely exceptional, hopefully. Fingers crossed again, as I say. But I agree with you. I think there's lots to be excited about, with maybe a few notes of caution that we might get into a bit later. But I overall feel really, really positive about it, and especially having so many teams that could do a lot better this season, some that might not do as well inevitably because someone has to come last. But anyway, I think either way it's going to shake out. It's going to be great fun to watch.
Surprises now. I think we've got to talk surprises because, I put Porsche and Andretti down, although you guys say Andretti, but Andretti, again, they're 2 drivers in the bottom half of the field in terms of the fastest pace. Porsche, again, they didn't break into the top half either. I know you might say it's only testing, but I remember, Pico, you were sort of, on the fence about Porsche, maybe not 100% sure, maybe they wouldn't be too happy coming from Valencia. Is that still your thinking?
The thing is, like, they didn't. I'm not sure whether they weren't able to do their proper 350 kilowatt lap times. I had to switch my head there. New season, new rules, new kilowatt hours. Yeah. Watch Nichols say 250 in the first qualifying heat. I'm just putting it out there. But yeah, they just didn't seem. Yes, Jake went up to the top of the times every now and again. So Pascal and Da Costa, they were in and around the top 10, but they just kept. By the end of it, they fell right down to the bottom of the table. And Da Costa, I think he was 2nd or 3rd slowest of everyone. But the test is this weekend, because this is where Porsche have always done well. They've always done so well in Mexico. They got their first ever pole position there. They did get their first ever win last year in Mexico City with Wehrlein. Wehrlein almost won in Puebla, even though it's a different track. It's still in Mexico. There's just something about Wehrlein and Mexico that works really well with, and the fact that Porsche got their first pole and their first win there. This weekend is going to be the telling tale on whether or not they're going to be in the fight this year.
Okay, so you're putting it all down to one race. Like, if you don't get it right in Mexico, Porsche, it's done. It's done. It's done. I'm trying to think. All right, Andretti. Like, again, they had a great end, Ed, to the season. Obviously, Jake Dennis was picking up points, picking up podiums and wins. And we kind of saw the Jake Dennis Well, we knew that, but then we really sort of catapulted Jake Dennis, I would say, to one of the star drivers in Formula E. And again, just not 100%. You'd want to at least see, like with Nissan, at least they had Norman Nato in the top 10, whereas Fenatraz was a bit lower down. But to have two cars in the same sort of category and Jake Dennis being as good as he is brought a slight concern to me.
Yeah, I guess I sort of disagree with Pico on one thing, because I think one of the things we have is we have so many teams that have a customer team. Like with Jaguar, they've got Envision. Of course, we've got DS and Maserati. We got Mahindra and Apt. Of course, Apt coming back. I mean, there was that interview the press conference that Pico recorded where Thomas Biermeier, the team principal at Apt, sounded absolutely exhausted. And it sounds like he wasn't the only team. That wasn't the only team that felt completely like overworked with the mechanics and stuff. We got Nissan and McLaren, of course, and I think Porsche and Andretti's the other one. The only one that's sort of the odd one out is Neo, of course, who are just doing their own thing with no customers. So I do think Andretti's fortunes, if Porsche start developing their powertrain, then I think that might have a bit of an effect on how Andretti does. I definitely think beginning of Gen 3, that's where we might start to see a lot of development, especially compared to the last few seasons of Gen 2, where there was a bit of a freeze between seasons 7 and 8. Essentially, so that was one why the hardware wasn't changing all that much, even though they were still making software gains, of course. So I agree. I definitely think Andretti is certainly going to be. I think they'll be mainly looking to outperform the factory Porsche team, essentially, in the first couple of races at least. And I definitely think Jake Dennis especially. And of course, you got Lotterer. There's the interesting thing of Lotterer moving from the factory team to the Andretti, the customer squad, essentially. Although it's a great... of course, Andretti's sort of in the news at the moment because of the whole F1 rumours and stuff. I doubt that will distract the Formula E team too much, because it's obviously a different set of people. But that certainly means there's going to be a little bit more attention on them than there would otherwise be. And I think Lotterer is going to be really... I think he should, with all that experience, should push Jake Dennis to be better than he might otherwise be. Although not to say that Jake Dennis was a slouch at all last season with Askew in the other seat. So I don't think Andretti is a team that looks like it's going from strength to strength at the moment. Although the sponsor, there's a little bit bare on the car. It's only really got the one big cryptocurrency. So I hope a couple more sponsors start putting their name on that Andretti, because then it means I have more sticker sheets to do on my Lego car. But anyway, that's by the by.
Hopefully Porsche are giving them some decent money. I know Andretti are technically buying it, but maybe there's a partnership in there somewhere. Who knows? But what I think is another interesting is two teams then that we haven't really talked about, but we know can cause damage, Pico, and that is Jaguar and Envision. Obviously, as Ed said, they have the same powertrain. So with Buemi though, I think this is the interesting thing, because obviously Jaguar have kept their same driver lineup, whereas we've got Cassidy and Buemi now, and it was frustrating watching Buemi over the last couple of seasons at Nissan, because we know how good he is, and he's just faded into this, out in Q1 effectively driver, with a couple of obviously getting into not Superpole anymore, the heats, semi-finals in some couple of races last season. But do you think him going to Envision we might see some of the old Buemi?
I think for Seb it was time. It was time for a reset, and after the last couple of years, yes, it didn't really work out. But actually, I'd say last season was actually a solid season from him. He had multiple points finishes across the season, and yes, admittedly they were like 8th or 9th or something. But I think that's kind of the most that the car could have really done. We've seen Nissan not be fantastic the last couple of years, unfortunately. But fingers crossed, hopefully we're on for a resurgence at some point there, and they'll be able to compete with their new lineup of Nato and Fenestraz. But yeah, for Seb, he needed, I think, to move to a new team, reset, and go again. And this opportunity came up with Envision, and he's made this move. And I think he needs to show that he is on pace with Cassidy from the get-go to prove that he can be there. Interestingly, this only happened for one session, and I think I mentioned it in my little pit walk down in Valencia. You can watch that on YouTube at the end of this. But they swapped cars for one of the sessions. I'm not sure whether that was just to get Buemi's eye in with a different car, see if there was any changes that he wanted to make with his car, But it was good to I think that was good. I think that was good for him to get like more experience in the Envision car because it's different. But yeah, I think they'll be there or thereabout. But both, I mean, like when we had that accident on the last day, which put him out for the entire day, and it actually similar to Diriyah a few years ago, when Edo Mortara had that brake failure in practice, it actually meant that the Jags weren't allowed out for basically the rest of the morning before they knew what was wrong with Buemi's car, because it looked like a brake failure and actually it was relatively similar to what happened to Edo. But the three of them got back out at some point. Casti only did a handful of laps on that last day in the end, but yeah. But yeah, I think Jaguars will be there or thereabout. But yeah,
it'd be interesting to see Ed. Like Jaguar and Envision, they're two teams that can spring a surprise this season. We said those names earlier of McLaren and Penske and so forth, right, Maserati, but it wouldn't surprise us if an Envision got up in the mix of that. It wouldn't surprise us if a Jaguar got into the mix with that, and especially with two teams. And we know how good Envision was with the Audi powertrain, right? They were better than the Audi team. Then now that they've got the Jaguar team, you're going to assume Envision are going to be able to run Jaguar close and try and outperform that powertrain like they did with Audi.
Yeah, certainly of the customer teams, Envision, you've got to say, is near the top of the pile. And they, of course, used to be the main DS team, of course. DS has sort of hopped around 3 different teams, essentially, during their time in Formula E. But it's interesting what Pico was saying about Buemi changing, swapping cars with Cassidy. I wonder, do you remember back in Season 7, there was this whole thing where Buemi did a large chunk of the season with basically a broken chassis, and Nissan didn't diagnose it until quite late in the season. And that really dented his confidence, especially because he didn't... Well, he proved a bit in Season 8, like Pico says, because he actually vastly outperformed Gunther in the points. But I thought that did sound interesting, because it does sound maybe there's a little bit of extra bedding in. I don't think there's too much we can really read into that, because from what I understand, it's quite not uncommon, especially in private testing, for teams to just put the drivers into different cars, especially when they've got reserve drivers and stuff floating around. But yeah, I think Envision Jaguar, the big concern is those reliability issues, and it's certainly become a big talking point. And I know Sam Smith and the race have made a lot of clickbait essentially out of sort of, is this the end of Formula E kind of things, because of this last day crash that Buemi had, and Casti having a similar moment where he sort of went through the gravel and avoided the wall, and sort of they certainly bring up some question marks. But I think the people at Formula E are very competent, and I think they know what they're doing, and I think things should be relatively safe in Mexico. It doesn't mean we necessarily might have see the most reliability, of course, and I think that is cause for excitement, because we don't know who exactly is going to be still running when the checkered flag falls. But yeah, I certainly think there's going to be room for improvement in terms of the actual timesheets for both teams, and I wouldn't put it past either of them.
Yeah, I suppose we can talk about the crash, and I'm surprised I should throw to Pico a little bit on this, because you were there. Obviously, Buemi had the brake crash, basically the car shut off, basically, but that by the car shutting off, he also lost brake, so he couldn't slow the car down, causing the accident. And there was concerns from private testing, so this was happening in the how many other days it is now, the manufacturer testing that they get prior to the testing days in Valencia, and these situations had come up. And for it to obviously come up in testing, so that's why it's been a talk point, and that's why it's been highlighted so much. So we're going to Valencia, we're going to Mexico now, hoping that these have been resolved, but we are going into a little bit of an unknown in terms of the reliability of these cars.
I kind of hate to break it to you, but I wasn't there when Buemi crashed. So the session starts at like 9 o'clock in the morning. This happened at 9:15, the Buemi accident, and I would have been there, but I was packing up because my flight was that evening. So I'm very sorry that I missed it. However, I did chat to people on the day, and they said, yeah, it was just like he just went straight on, and when the car came back, the tires were in, there was no front end, and yeah, so it was yeah, it was very similar to Edo's crash in Diriyah a few years ago. But yeah, I've forgotten the rest of your question, mate.
To be honestly though, I was gonna say
I'm
it's like
focusing on this, like.
I was gonna say like great way to tell your boss that I was late to work today.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. Hashtag we move on. Anyway, right. Whether this makes the podcast or not, I don't know. But right,
I hope
let's
it
move.
does.
Right, let's move on. I suppose the main thing then to talk about now is Mexico, because Mexico, they've added the chicane. Now, obviously, we can sort of add on to the story from what we were just saying, is that we were wondering about the failures, and this adding of the chicane, Ed, could be something to do with that in order to slow the cars down to the approach speed to the stadium section. So if there was a failure, if there was something that and the drivers couldn't hit the brake pedals, that it wouldn't be as big of a shunt if the chicane wasn't there effectively.
Possibly. I think it certainly helps. I think what it's more in for is for an opportunity for the cars to regen energy, of course, with that front brake regen as well as the rears in use for this season. So the only person I think who's probably not a big fan of the chicane is Pascal Wehrlein, because of course it brings back memories of season 5 and him cutting that chicane, which effectively lost him the win that season, even though there was that last minute Degrassi getting him right at the end anyway, at the death at the flag. But yeah, I think the main sort of big straight is that's going to be unchanged from the Peraltada, which still doesn't have the chicane in the middle because they got rid of that. So I definitely think it's more just so they have the extra regen zone because they got rid of that Peraltada chicane and they sort of felt they needed it for these Gen 3 cars. And to me, that makes sense. And it'll be interesting to see, just especially because it was a good overtaking opportunity as well into that chicane. So for me, there's a lot of positives to it. I don't see it as a big cause for concern, but we'll have to see when we get to Mexico.
No, indeed. For me, it's like one of those chicanes in London, right, Pico, where you're like, oh, it might have some overtaking. And they were like, I don't know. And I think it's the exact same for this one, because I think they're going to be coming in at such a weird angle, because it's kind of like it sweeps, and then all of a sudden they've got to turn. I just think it'll be too fast for an overtaking maneuver. So maybe that regen is probably the best idea, maybe the idea that Formula E were going for reintroducing that chicane.
Yeah, I think it's mainly for safety reasons as well, because I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was the first year that we had the new layout. Daniel Abt had an accident in practice at the end of practice 2, I think it was, where he went straight on the back straight and then into the barriers. And it's there isn't enough runoff, because obviously the track double batter comes into the stadium, then goes out the stadium at the same place. And so if there is a brake failure, which is fairly likely, unfortunately, with the
but the walls are much closer than what they would be for Formula One, for example.
Yeah, exactly, because Formula One do the little stadium, then go out halfway through it, and they don't do the full Pelotada, unlike us. But yeah, I think it's going to be like it's going to make the racing worse. I think because it doesn't add it takes away the overtaking zone going into the stadium, because everyone's already done a break through the chicane and then break again into the stadium, so no one's really going to be able to get that much of an advantage. But it's the right thing to do for where we are at the moment. But yeah, okay. That's the thing with the technology. Like, they need to try and get on top of it, and then fingers crossed when they have, and we develop further into Gen 3, that the cars will be a bit safer and they'll be able to race a bit better, and we'll be able to go back to the old layout that we had for the back end of Gen 2.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I think it's going to be an interesting season in terms of when we get the attack charge, and when everything that Formula E want to get out of Gen 3 actually comes. So I think to conclude the episode, boys, I think we'll just get sort of, what do you think is going to happen? Maybe this season? Who's going to be world champion? Who's going to win in Mexico? thoughts. I'm going to start because obviously putting you two on the spot like that is horrible. So I'll start. I'm going to start with world champion first. I'm going for Maximilian Günther because you know what? I don't care if the DS Penske, they've been in control, even though they didn't win the last couple of championships, you could say, with Mercedes. But I don't want them to win it. I think, you know, they've been at the stronghold of Formula E for a while, and I would love the Günther story. What a story that would be. Nearly out of Formula E, comes in, smashes testing in a very good Maserati car, and wins the World Championship. Who do I think is going to win the first race? I think we're going to get a McLaren victory. And I'm going to go with Jake Hughes. I think that Jake Hughes will get a debut race win in Mexico this season. Yeah. So, who would like to go first, boys? Ed, go on then.
Well, I think Eduardo Mortara is going to win the first race in Mexico, and I feel like he's been sort of overshadowed, but he always seems to go really, really well in Mexico. He was the only one who was really able to keep the Porsches in sight. Finished third, I think, last season there for Venturi, and I think he's really settled into that team. I think Maximilian Günther, quick though he is going to struggle to get on top of him because Lucas Di Grassi, of all people, found Mortara as more than his match. I think Ido's been saying things like in the media, like, "Oh, I've been the Neely man for too many years." I think Ido's an incredibly good driver, and I think now in Gen 3 is his time to shine. As for who's going to be the world champ, I'm going to go completely out of the box. I'm going to say Jake Dennis because he came so close in Season 7. Then Season 8 was sort of a rebuilding year for Andretti, though he still won in London. I think Jake Dennis, even though he's got that Porsche powertrain in the back, I think he's going to beat the odds. He's going to beat all these DS powertrain cars and win that Drivers' Championship. But I think probably DS Penske going to win the Teams Championship.
That is bold. I like that. That is bold. If the team that we're like, oh, we're not sure if they've got a good powertrain, he's going to win it. He's going to win it. Pico.
Do you know what? I might put a tenner on for Ed to see if Jake wins the title.
You might get good odds. I don't know what the odds are like in
the
Formula
odds would
E.
be pretty damn good.
I don't know what the odds are like in Formula E, but if you were to gamble on Formula E, I don't know what you get.
I don't think we're allowed to advertise gambling, are we?
You get the odds up for the championship. I'll talk about what I think is going to happen this weekend and this season. Because I'll be honest, I'm in complete agreement with Ed in terms of who's going to win this weekend. I think Edo Mortara is a solid shout. He was front row. He spun across the line in qualifying.
He did, yes.
I was in the stadium. I had no idea it happened until I saw it on the screen. Edo for the win. And for the championship, I was hoping one of you would go for one of the DS Penskes, so I would just say the other one. But I'm going to say it is 1, 2, 3 times a world champion, Jean-Eric Vergne.
Oh, interesting.
No, not interesting. Very boring.
Yeah, very boring. To be fair, Jake Dennis, I'm like, go on, son. I'm like, go on. I'm behind Ed. I'm like, go on. I've been there in Mexico. Like, go on.
Finally, you're on my side.
Go on,
Nico Muller for the championship.
Nico Muller. Like, yeah, let's go.
We haven't talked about Apt. I feel like Robin Fryns is going to do very well this season, but the Apt, I think, might be the thing that holds him back.
Apt,
yeah.
They think that they're a little bit behind at the moment. They need to do a little bit of catch up. So we'll see. I'm hoping that they get towards it midway through the season, but I think the first few races they might be a little bit on the back foot because, according to Thomas Biermeier, it's a bit of a rush job. So yeah.
Doesn't surprise me that, to be honest with you, but good luck to Apt, obviously, Nico Muller and Robin Fryns. It was always interesting, I thought, when Robin Fryns decided to move there. Obviously, I know he has his Audi connections, but I did think the Envision would be a stronger package going into the season, but only time will tell. We'll be back after the Mexican E-Prix, can you believe it, to wrap up everything that went on, talk about all the major talking points, find out why Jake Dennis is the best driver in the world because he just won the race. So I suppose it's goodbye from me. It's goodbye from Edward Hunter and Jack Pickering. Thank you so much for watching the FEZ Show. We will see you after the Mexican E-Prix. Enjoy it. Goodbye.